"Don't cry, mister. You can borrow my mom," said the little boy to the CEO, sitting alone at the park on Christmas Eve. The snow fell softly that evening, in slow, drifting flakes that settled over the quiet park like dust on a forgotten memory. 1 week before Christmas, and the city was lit with cheer, window displays blinking red and green, carols piping from distant storefronts. But here, beside the frozen lake where children once skated years ago, everything was still. Callum Reed sat alone on a cold iron bench, his coat buttoned to the top, a gray scarf wound neatly around his neck. The leather gloves on his hands did not stop the cold from seeping in. Beside him on the bench, a paper coffee cup sat untouched. The steam had long since faded. His eyes were bloodshot, though he had not cried. He did not cry anymore. Not since he was 9 and sitting in a group home on Christmas Eve, waiting for someone, anyone, to choose him. No one did. Too small, the social worker had said, not unkindly. Too quiet, so he stopped waiting. And years later, when he had built everything himself, his tech empire, his penthouse apartment, the admiration of an entire industry, he still returned, without meaning to that boy on the bench, waiting. This year, it felt worse. Like the success had grown too big, too loud, and he had grown smaller in its shadow. A laugh echoed distantly across the park. Callum looked up. 2 figures walked slowly along the snow-covered path. A woman in a thick gray wool coat, her blonde hair pulled into a low, simple ponytail, and beside her, a small boy in a puffy jacket, wearing a knit hat with fuzzy bear ears. He clutched a paper bag, its sides crinkled with grease spots and warmth. They stopped near a bench across from Callum's. The woman bent down, pulling out wrapped cookies and handing them gently to a man hunched beneath a threadbare blanket. She smiled, said something quiet. Then the two moved on. Callum looked down at the box again. Still unopened, still meaningless. "Mommy." He looked sad. The boy's voice was soft, curious. Callum glanced up and saw the boy looking at him, his gloved hand tugging at his mother's coat. She followed his gaze and immediately looked unsure. She whispered something to him and tried to gently guide him away, but the boy broke free. He walked up to Callum, small boots crunching in the snow, and tilted his head slightly as he peered up. "Don't cry, mister," he said. "You can borrow my mom." The words hit Callum like a gust of wind straight to the chest. Unexpected, pure, impossible to brace for. He stared, speechless. He had no words. He did not remember the last time anyone had spoken to him like that. Not from pity, not from performance, just noticing. The woman hurried forward, cheeks flushed. "I am so sorry, he's very friendly." But she did not pull the boy away. Instead, she reached into the bag, pulled out a cookie wrapped in wax paper, and held it out with a hesitant smile. "Merry Christmas," she said. "It's probably sweeter than necessary." Like Jamie, Callum looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were tired but kind. Her hands, slightly red from the cold, held the cookie like it was something worth offering. Her voice had no pity in it, no awkward apology, just warmth. He reached out, took the cookie, and nodded. His fingers brushed hers, barely. They trembled, and not from the cold. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded, already turning to guide Jamie away. But the boy lingered just a moment longer, turning to wave. "She's really nice, mister," Jamie added with a grin. "You'll feel better if you eat the whole thing." And then they were gone, disappearing down the snowy path, the boy's voice trailing into the night as he chatted about gingerbread and lights. Callum sat still. In his hand, the cookie felt heavier than the gift box, and far more real. Elise was about to lead Jamie home when the voice behind her, gentle, uncertain, called out, "Is there a place nearby? I mean, where I could buy you two a hot chocolate?" She turned. Callum stood where they had left him, the cookie now half-eaten in his gloved hand, the gift box tucked under one arm. His expression was difficult to read, tentative, almost shy. Elise hesitated. Before she could answer, Jamie beamed. "Yes, There's a cozy one just around the corner, and that was that. The cafe was tucked between a bookstore and a florist, its windows glowing with warm golden light, gently fogged from the heat inside. A wreath hung crookedly above the door, and through the glass, shelves of pastries and cinnamon sticks lined the counter. They stepped in. The scent of cloves, cocoa, and pine wrapped around them like a soft scarf. Jamie bounded to a corner table near the small fireplace, while Elise and Callum followed more slowly. They took their seats, Callum across from Elise, Jamie beside her, and the fire crackled quietly beside them. Outside, snow continued to fall in a hush. Jamie leaned forward, breathless. "We have a tree at home. It's only 3 feet tall, but it has real candy canes. And I made a star out of glitter and cardboard." "That sounds magical," Callum said softly. Elise smiled and opened her bag, pulling out a silver thermos. "I usually bring this for Jamie after we make our cookie rounds." She poured rich hot chocolate into 2 paper cups, one for Jamie, the other she offered to Callum. He accepted it, fingers brushing hers. "It has been a long time since anyone poured something warm for me." Elise did not ask why. She simply said, "Jamie is terrible at ignoring people who look sad. That part he gets from me." Callum gave a small nod and looked down at the cup. The steam rose gently, like breath in the cold. Across from him, Elise tucked a strand of golden hair behind her ear, then turned her attention to Jamie, wiping a spot of chocolate from his chin with a napkin. She laughed at something, he whispered, and leaned in close to hear it better. Callum found himself watching, not out of curiosity, but out of something quieter, something closer to longing. There was no performance in her, no false cheer, just a softness, a steadiness. She seemed like someone who gave what she had and made it enough. The small table lamp beside them cast a glow on her face, and the edges of her pale hair shimmered in the light. For a moment, she looked like she belonged to some quiet story he had once forgotten how to read. Jamie turned to him. "Do you have a tree?" Callum blinked. "A tree? For Christmas? Oh," he smiled. "Just the one in the office. Not sure it counts." Elise looked at him with a gentle expression. "Every tree counts, as long as someone looks at it with belief." Something in her voice, simple, unassuming, touched something tender in him. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Callum smiled. Not the polite, practiced smile he gave in boardrooms or interviews, but a real one, small, fragile, true. Jamie grinned. "You look nicer when you smile." Callum chuckled softly. "I'll try to remember that." They sat like that for a while, talking, sipping cocoa, watching the fire glow. Elise did not ask what he did for work. Jamie did not ask why he looked sad. And Callum did not ask why 2 people with so little warmth to spare had chosen to share it with him anyway. But something in him, something long frozen, began to shift. He still did not know their last name, but he already knew this night would stay with him, maybe longer than any gift ever could. The living room was quiet, save for the ticking of the clock and the occasional rustle of papers. Elise sat cross-legged on the rug, her blonde hair loosely tied, strands falling across her cheek as she leaned over a pile of folders spread out across the coffee table. Outside, snow gathered softly along the railing of her small balcony. Inside was warm, filled with the scent of cinnamon and printer ink. She was working late again, preparing a proposal for a children's interactive theater program she hoped to launch in the new year. The concept had been inspired by Jamie, his vivid imagination, the way stories lit up his face. She wanted to build something that made children feel seen. In search of old material and inspiration, Elise pulled out one of the last storage boxes belonging to her mother, who had passed away 4 years earlier. Her mother had been a social worker, often offering temporary care for children in the foster system. Elise remembered fragments, names, quiet faces, brief visits from kids who stayed in their small home for a few days at a time. As she sifted through the folders, a thin manila one caught her eye. It was older than the rest, edges soft, the paper yellowed. A rusted paperclip held several pages together. Typed in fading ink on the top sheet, Callum Reed, temporary care, December 1999. Elise froze. She sat upright, her fingers slightly trembling as she opened the folder. Inside was a black and white school photo. A boy, about 9 years old. Dark hair, large, wary eyes. His expression unreadable, but underneath it, sadness, a kind of silent defense. And then, memory returned. She had been 9 that winter. Her mother brought home a boy to stay for a week. He was quiet, withdrawn, always staring out the window with a long red scarf clutched in his hands. Elise remembered feeling a mixture of curiosity and concern. One night, she had drawn a reindeer on the back of a grocery list. Wobbly legs, crooked antlers, a giant red nose. She colored it in and slipped it under the boy's door. The next morning, she found it resting on his suitcase. When he hugged her goodbye, he cried, but said nothing. And now, after all these years, that boy had a name, Callum Reed. The same man who had been sitting alone on the park bench that cold evening last week. The man who now wore tailored coats and spoke with quiet authority, but whose eyes still, at times, looked unbearably alone. 2 days later, Elise asked if he wanted to meet for coffee. She didn't say why. They met in a small cafe tucked off the main square, her favorite spot. Wooden tables, soft jazz, walls lined with old books. Elise arrived first and found them a quiet corner table. When Callum walked in, tall and deliberate, snow melting on his shoulders, she greeted him with a smile, quieter than usual. After they ordered, Elise reached into her bag and gently placed the folder on the table. Callum looked at it, then at her. She spoke softly. "Do you remember a small house outside town? December 1999. He said nothing. She opened the folder and slid the photo toward him. "I think we met before," she said. "You stayed with us for a week. I drew you a reindeer." He didn't move at first. Then his eyes dropped to the photo, then the folder, then to his coffee. Silence. Finally, he whispered, "I kept that drawing. For years. Folded it so many times it tore." He let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh. "I lost it when I moved into my first apartment. I looked for it everywhere." Elise smiled gently. "I drew terribly back then." "No," he said, his voice catching. "It was the only thing that made me feel like I wasn't invisible." He looked up at her, the careful mask gone. "You told me I deserved a Christmas. I never forgot that." She nodded. "You did. You still do." The spoon in his hand tapped once, then stilled. No dramatic tears, no sweeping gesture, just a stillness, deep and quiet. And for the first time, Callum looked at Elise not as a kind stranger or the woman with cocoa and calm in her voice, but as someone who, unknowingly, had once saved a small part of him and had just given it back. The soft buzz of the theater still echoed in Elise's ears. The trial run of the children's play had just wrapped, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to exhale. Parents clapped, children giggled, volunteers beamed with pride. Elise had stood at the edge of the stage, her blonde ponytail loose from the rush of the day, her gray cardigan dusted with glitter from a stray prop. Tired, but glowing. It had worked. Months of quiet labor. Late nights stitching together scenes between Jamie's bedtime stories. Every line of the script had been rooted in kindness, in wonder, what she used to dream about as a child. The cast had been made up of local kids, some from shelters, some with speech delays, others just overlooked. But they had sung, they had danced, they had shown. Elise smiled all the way home, until the next morning. She saw the post before she finished her tea. An anonymous blog article had begun to circulate online. Accusations, comparisons, screenshots. The tone was venomous but polished, claiming that Elise's script was suspiciously similar to a lesser-known children's play from 3 years prior. The anonymous author, clearly someone with inside access, suggested Elise had repackaged an old idea under the guise of charity. The post quickly went viral in local circles. It was all smoke and mirrors, cherry-picked lines, side-by-side graphics, out-of-context photos, but it stirred doubt. By afternoon, the play's main sponsor announced they were freezing funding, pending a full review. A few collaborators grew distant. One dropped out. Elise stared at her phone screen, numb. She knew who wrote it. A former collaborator she had once cut ties with, brilliant, but erratic and dishonest. She had chosen integrity over popularity, and now it was backfiring. Still, she did not go online to defend herself. She did not spiral. She simply went back to work, quietly printing handouts for the kids who would be coming in the next day. Her fingers trembled a little as she stapled the corners. Meanwhile, in a quieter room across the city, Jamie sat cross-legged in Callum's office. He had come by after school with a holiday card he made himself, complete with glitter glue explosions. While Jamie sipped juice from a paper cup, he looked up and said, almost offhandedly, "Did you know people are saying my mom stole her play? But she would never steal. She even told me not to take crayons home from school if they're not mine." Callum froze. "Where did you hear that?" he asked, too calm. "Some kids at school saw it on their parents' phones," Jamie replied, biting his straw. "But I told them they're wrong." That was all Callum needed to hear. He said nothing more to Jamie, just gave him a half smile and a second cookie. That night, he called in his legal team. Within 24 hours, a formal statement was issued by Reed and Holt Legal Affairs. The document, professionally worded and thorough, included proof of Elise's original drafts, time-stamped, witnessed, submitted. It laid out a digital trail of her project's development, including planning documents and communication with educators. The anonymous post's author? Unmasked. A cease and desist was filed. A lawsuit followed. The response rippled fast. The sponsor emailed Elise the next morning. Their tone was apologetic, regretful even. They reinstated the funding and offered additional promotional support. "We believe in your vision," they said. Elise blinked at the screen, then checked her phone. Still nothing from Callum. She called him. When he picked up, his voice was as calm as ever. "Elise, you did something, didn't you?" she asked softly. "I did what anyone should," he replied. "For someone who deserves better." There was silence. Then her voice broke. "I am not used to being protected," she whispered. He paused. "I used to say that too," he said. "But no one should get used to being alone." Her throat tightened, her eyes filled, and for the first time in a long time, she cried. Not from fear, not from injustice, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen, of being backed without being asked. Across town, the children rehearsed for their next show. Curtains would rise again, but Elise knew this time, if they fell, she would not be falling alone. It started with a question. An innocent classroom conversation about family trees, holiday plans, and who would be visiting whom for Christmas. Jamie had smiled and talked about decorating their little tree, how he and his mom baked cookies shaped like stars and snowmen. But then someone asked, "Where's your dad?" When Jamie shrugged and said he did not have one, the snickers came. One boy leaned in with a cruel grin. "So your mom just made you up?" Another chimed in, "Maybe your dad saw you and ran away." The teacher hushed them, but the sting had already settled in Jamie's chest. That evening, Elise returned home from a meeting to find the apartment too quiet. The front door locked, but Jamie's shoes were missing from their usual spot. She checked every room, every closet. Then her voice rose in panic. "Jamie?" No answer. She ran downstairs, asked neighbors, called his friends' parents. No one had seen him. Her hands shook as she dialed the police, heart thudding in her throat. Tears came, fast and hot. Without thinking, she called Callum. He answered on the first ring. "Elise? Jamie's gone," she gasped. I don't know where. He's not here." Within minutes, Callum was in his car. He did not ask what Jamie wore or how long he had been gone. He knew. "I think I know where he went," he said. The snow was falling gently now, like it had that night. The park was empty. blanketed in white, the lake frozen over once more, and there, at the same bench where it all began, sat a small figure, bundled in a coat far too thin for the cold. Jamie was curled up, his little knees pulled to his chest, his wool hat slipping over one eye. His mittens were wet, his cheeks red, and his breath came out in soft clouds. Callum approached slowly. "Hey, buddy." Jamie looked up. His lower lip trembled. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Callum sat beside him. "Why did you come here?" Jamie glanced at the bench, then at the empty space beside it. "I wanted to see if someone still waited here." "You did." His voice cracked. "You were crying that day, and I thought maybe, if I waited here too, someone would come." Callum's throat tightened. He remembered being Jamie's age, sitting outside in the cold, watching other children get picked up, wondering what made him less worth coming for. The ache of that waiting never really left. He reached out and pulled Jamie into his arms, wrapping his coat around him, holding him close. "I'm here," he said, voice thick, "and your mom's looking everywhere for you. Let's go home, yeah?" Jamie buried his face into Callum's chest and nodded. "I didn't mean to make her cry. I just wanted to understand." Back at Elise's apartment, the door burst open before they even knocked. Elise dropped to her knees, arms out, face streaked with tears. Jamie ran to her. "I'm sorry, Mommy." She held him tight, hands trembling as she kissed his forehead again and again. "You're safe. That's all that matters." Callum stood at the doorway, watching them, the weight of his own past pressing against his chest. But for the first time, it felt like that past had somewhere to land, somewhere to soften. Jamie peeked up at him. "Callum?" "Yeah?" "You came for me." Callum crouched beside him. "Always." That night, the snow kept falling. But inside, warmth returned, not just in blankets and cocoa, but in something deeper. For Callum, who once waited in vain, and Jamie, who once thought he had no one to call, the bench in the snow had come full circle, and in the quiet glow of the Christmas lights, something like healing began to bloom. The apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon and oranges. Elise had just finished heating up a pot of cider, and Jamie was carefully unraveling a tangled strand of tinsel on the floor, tongue poking out in focus. Their miniature Christmas tree, a reused one from years past, stood in the corner, already leaning slightly to one side. "Careful with the lights, sweetheart," Elise called gently from the kitchen. "They're older than you are." Jamie giggled, holding up a tangled ball of glowing red and green. "I think they're alive. They don't want to be tamed." Elise laughed softly and stepped into the living room, drying her hands on a towel. Her golden hair was tied loosely, a few strands falling out as she tucked one behind her ear. The apartment was humble but warm, filled with handmade decorations and quiet joy. Then the doorbell rang. They both paused. It was Christmas Eve, and they were not expecting anyone. Jamie scrambled to his feet, darting toward the door. "Maybe it's Santa, early." Elise, amused but curious, followed. When she opened the door, she froze, just for a second. Callum stood there, his black coat dusted with snow, his breath fogging in the cold. In his hands, he held a small but lush pine tree, already wrapped with twinkling lights. It leaned a little, imperfect and real. His gloves were mismatched, clearly pulled on in a hurry, and he looked slightly uncertain, as if unsure if he had gone too far. "I thought," he said, clearing his throat, "maybe your tree could use a little reinforcement." Jamie's eyes lit up like the lights on the tree. "Mister, you brought backup," Callum laughed, and for the first time, it did not sound restrained. Jamie stepped forward, then looked up with all the confidence of a child who knew what mattered most. "Mister, maybe you don't borrow anymore," he said. "Just stay." Callum blinked. The words struck somewhere deep, past the years of meetings, polished suits, and silent holidays, past the boy he used to be who was always too quiet to ask anyone to stay. He looked at Elise. She met his gaze, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, understanding, perhaps even permission. Her smile was soft, her voice gentle. "Come in." We were just about to start the lights. She stepped aside, hand brushing back that same golden strand of hair, as if clearing a path not just into the room, but into something more. Callum stepped in, setting the tree gently next to theirs. "It's not much," he said, glancing at their worn decorations, "but I thought maybe it would feel more like Christmas." Jamie looked between the two trees and nodded sagely. "Now it's a forest." They spent the next hour decorating both trees. Jamie narrated every ornament, telling Callum the stories behind each one. A candy cane from last year, a star made from popsicle sticks, a snowflake he insisted looked like a spaceship. Elise made them cocoa, and Callum accepted the mug with a quiet smile. He sat close, but not too close, next to Elise, their shoulders nearly touching, and when Jamie, curled up under a blanket later that evening, yawned and whispered, "This is the best Christmas ever," neither adult spoke. They did not need to. Outside, snow kept falling, soft and endless. Inside, warmth radiated not just from the heater, or the cocoa, or the lights, but from something quieter, steadier, presence. No declarations, no grand promises. Just a man who once sat alone on a bench with a coffee gone cold, now sitting beside a boy who offered him a place to belong, and a woman who never asked why he stayed, only made space when he did. And in that quiet, ordinary room, borrowing had quietly become staying. The auditorium lights dimmed to a soft gold, casting a gentle hush over the gathered crowd. Families packed into the rows, coats bundled on laps, phones silenced, eyes drawn to the small wooden stage wrapped in string lights and handmade paper snowflakes. Outside, the snow still fell, slow and quiet, but inside, there was warmth, a pulsing energy of something about to begin. Callum sat near the front, surrounded by strangers yet feeling something unfamiliar. Comfort. In his hands was the folded program of the evening's Christmas showcase, and there, printed near the bottom, was the title of the final act, "The Boy and the Borrowed Light," written and directed by Elise Grant, starring Jamie Grant. He smiled before he realized it. Backstage, Elise stood in the shadows of the curtain, headset slightly askew, a clipboard in hand. Her hair was tied low as always, golden strands escaping, catching the faint glow of backstage bulbs. Her gray wool coat was dusted with flour and glitter from days of preparation, but her eyes were bright, focused, alive. She whispered encouragements to the kids as they lined up, adjusted one boy's crooked halo, smoothed the back of a little girl's wrinkled cape, and then, kneeling, she took Jamie's hands in hers. "You're ready," she said softly. Jamie nodded. "What if I forget a line? Then smile. And borrow a little light from someone in the audience. You'll know who." Jamie grinned. The curtain opened. The stage was set with painted cardboard trees, and glowing lanterns hung from fishing wire. Jamie walked out as the central figure of the play, a boy looking for the light he lost. The scenes unfolded with charming simplicity. The boy wandered through shadows, meeting characters who offered him pieces of their light, kindness, stories, laughter, until finally, near the end, he stood alone once again. A single spotlight found Jamie center stage. He looked small under it, his voice steady but gentle. "When you're lost in the dark," he said, pausing just enough, "you can borrow someone's light until yours shines again." Silence followed, not the kind born of awkwardness or error, but the kind born from truth. Every adult in the room stilled. Some reached for tissues, others placed hands over their hearts. Callum sat unmoving, his eyes fixed on the boy whose words had cut through every defense he had spent years building. He did not cry, but something inside him, old and guarded, bent. He turned his gaze to the wings, to where Elise stood hidden from view, arms wrapped gently across her chest, watching not just the play but her son, their moment. She did not notice Callum looking at her. She was too wrapped in the children's world, in their voices, in the hush of belief that filled the room. She was radiant, not from makeup or spotlight, but from presence, quiet, strength, unshakable grace. Callum felt it as clearly as he would have felt the warmth of a fire in his hands. Elise had always been the borrowed light. From the very first moment, from the snow-covered bench to the night she opened her door, to the way she never pushed, never asked for more, never questioned his hesitations, but had stood still and let him see. The applause burst like snowfall, gentle at first, then thundering. Jamie bowed. The curtain fell. The lights came up. The room buzzed with joy, but Callum remained still, that last line echoing in his mind. He did not move to the backstage doors right away. He sat in the quiet afterglow, fingers still holding the now crumpled program, as if anchoring himself. Somewhere inside him, a promise took shape. Not loud, not rushed, not even spoken, just a silent vow. That light, once borrowed, would never be taken for granted again. The snow had softened by the time they reached the park, falling now in slow, lazy flurries that dusted the trees and glimmered under the faint glow of Christmas lights. It was quiet, just like it had been that night, when the world had felt too cold and too wide, and a single voice had cracked through the silence. Callum slowed as they neared the bench. The same one, weathered, familiar, dusted in a thin layer of white. Elise glanced at him, her breath curling into the air, and then, without a word, she brushed off the snow and sat. Jamie climbed up beside her, his legs swinging off the edge. Callum followed. She reached into her canvas bag and pulled out a silver thermos. The scent of cocoa drifted up as she poured the warm drink into 3 mismatched cups she had packed just in case. She handed one to Callum, one to Jamie, and kept the last for herself. Jamie pulled something from inside his coat, a folded piece of cardstock, edges still damp with glitter glue. He opened it carefully and held it up. On the front was a child's drawing. 3 stick figures sitting on a bench beneath twinkling lights. One tall figure in a long coat with sad eyes, a woman with golden hair offering a cookie, and a little boy in a bear hat, smiling wide. "That's you," Jamie said, pointing to the middle. "And that's Mommy. And me. It's the first time we met." Callum took the card gently, something tightening in his chest. Jamie leaned against his arm. "I'm glad you borrowed her that day." Elise looked at them both, her smile soft and quiet. She sipped from her cup, her golden hair falling slightly over one eye. The street lamp behind her lit her face like a memory made real. Callum set the card down on his lap and looked at her. Then, he reached over, took her hand in his. Her fingers curled instinctively into his palm. No hesitation. They did not need declarations. No grand speeches. No perfect moments framed by music and fanfare. Just this. A bench. A boy. A beginning. Callum turned to Jamie and said, "You were right, you know." Jamie tilted his head. "That day, when you said I could borrow your mom." Jamie smiled like it was the most obvious truth in the world. Callum looked back at Elise, his voice quiet but steady. "I'm not borrowing anymore. I'm staying." She didn't reply right away. She didn't need to. She only smiled, leaned her head against his shoulder, and let the warmth between them fill the quiet space where loneliness used to live. And under the soft snow and string lights, with cocoa warming their hands and history behind them, they sat, a man who had once waited on a bench and found nothing, a woman who gave without asking for anything in return, and a little boy who had seen sadness and offered hope. Together, not perfect, but whole. Thank you for listening to Don't Cry, Mister. You Can Borrow My Mom. A quiet, healing journey that began with a child's innocent offer and unfolded into an imperfect but complete little family. If this story touched something in your heart, even for just a moment, please subscribe and hit the hype button to support soul-stirring stories. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue bringing heartfelt stories that linger long after they end. See you in the next story, where emotions speak louder than words